Greetings, Race community. Brent coming in live with a 2-for-1 today with my guest, Debbie Dutton, president of the UNH Foundation and vice president for university advancement, also an aspiring genealogist, and fellow RV enthusiast, Troy Finn, who is the associate vice president for development at the University of New Hampshire. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I am just going to go out on a limb and say that every advancement leader that is listening should look at Debbie's webpage at UNH and include some hobbies and a job description. It is a really nice touch. Troy, I was kind of disappointed that you didn't have the equivalent, so let's make this be a catalyst to get there. But just so everybody knows, Debbie likes genealogy, history, hiking, enjoying the ocean, and spending time with family and friends. Nice touch. Whose idea was that, Debbie?
I want to say that some smart person in my office said I needed to do that so that I could be more relatable to people.
I'm sold. I don't know if you're relatable at all, but I'm convinced you are now. I feel like that was a good move. What is one thing we should all know about genealogy that we probably don't?
It's really easy. So there's absolutely no excuse not to be able to do it now. Thanks to our technology, the web, it is just super easy and fun.
It's like prospect research meets
on yourself,
your family. Got it.
Exactly.
Well, I'm looking forward to hosting both of you. And as a point of reference, many of you know that I spent 10 months traveling the country with my 3 boys and my wife during the pandemic in 2020 and early 2021. And along the way, reconnected with Troy, who shared with me that his aunt used to take him on the road in a Winnebago and that he was one of 10 siblings. But I cannot recall if his aunt took all 10 siblings in the Winnebago at once. So can you just refresh my memory, Troy?
Oh, Brent, that was more one-on-one time. I think a few of my siblings tried to do it, but they were kind of at that point in their lives where, like, my sisters wanted to spend like a lot of time like with a hair dryer doing their hair, or my brothers, I don't know, were just into other things. So they didn't really tag along. So it was really just a one-on-one. We would go all over in her Winnebago Warrior.
So you were her favorite niece and nephew.
I was the navigator. Yeah.
Well, we are going to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time today. I look forward to getting to know both of you better and potentially for you to get to know each other a little bit better. One of my favorite questions to ask our guests has been to just understand our own paths into higher education, which oftentimes will shape at some point our trajectory. And so I want to start with you, Debbie. Tell me about junior year of high school, Debbie. Who was she? What was she into? And what led her to the University of Maine?
Yeah, so good question. I was an athlete who sort of did my homework, but always wanted to go to UMaine. So that was an easy fit. My mom, my brother, my uncle, lots of folks that I knew went there. And when I got to UMaine, I was in a sorority. And by my senior year, I was the president of my sorority. And it was 1989, 88 and 89, when fraternities and sororities really needed to do a lot of work to have a positive image, but to do positive in the community. And so that's really how I got hooked on working with nonprofits. We adopted a homeless women's shelter in Bangor, Maine, and we would do fundraising to be able to support that cause. And it really just stuck with me, and I never left, I guess.
So tell me about that experience, and like, what was literally the process to raise money at that time for that cause?
Oh God, I think we sold like food at the football games, and maybe did a raffle. So really, really basic stuff. And it was probably a couple $100 that we donated to the women's shelter. But we all felt really great about our efforts, and it was an opportunity for all of us to do something together and be visible and be seen on campus and set a good example.
And how did that shape your immediate kind of post-college career path? What was the first role coming out of school?
So my mom was a teacher. She was a 4th grade teacher for, 65 years. I'm making that up, but a really long time. And so I became a teacher, and I loved it. But I really wanted to continue to use more of I was a journalism major, and I wanted to use writing skills and communication skills. And so I landed a job at the National Multiple Sclerosis Society in Portland, Maine. And it allowed me to do event planning, project management, marketing, communications. I mean, you did it all, right? And you were raising money for a really worthy cause. And it had just always been in my heart since that opportunity to volunteer at UMaine. And so when I did that, I just was like, wow, this is awesome. I get to work with amazing people in the community who are by their own right, successful, committed, want to see better come from their efforts. And I get to work with them to really do better for other people. And it just felt great, and I stuck with it.
Love it. Troy, spotlight on you. Junior year of high school. Who was that guy? Where was he? What led him to Holy Cross in Worcester?
So Brent, I had an unusual path to Holy Cross in that I, at that point in my life, was actually interested in becoming a priest. And so I went to Holy Cross, but lived in a seminary all the years that I was there, and studied philosophy and theology, and worked on a capital campaign for the diocese. And then decided in my senior year that was not going to be my path, and didn't really know what to do with a degree in philosophy, and didn't think that having worked on a campaign was really a marketable skill, but turned out to be. I ended up transitioning over to looking at a job at Dana-Farber to become a major gift assistant for the famous Ellie Starr. But while I was interviewing, they decided I would be a better financial analyst working in operations. And so I went down that path, and then just grew with Dana-Farber over the years. We started, I think there were 30 of us when I started, and over 200 of us in the development shop by the time I left years later. So that's my sort of swerving path into fundraising. And but it all started back then in high school.
We are breaking ground with an almost priest and a former teacher, and it's great to have that context for what led you down the path. But in both cases, it sounds like getting exposure to philanthropy through your undergraduate experiences was really important. And I think, frankly, as we think about talent pipeline and future of the sector, so many of our guests had that experience. For many of our current advancement leaders, they started as phonathon callers, or they were in Greek life, or they did get looped into some sort of senior class campaign, and it's almost accidental all the time. And so one of the big questions that we think about is just what are the steps we can take to create more exposure to the profession of philanthropy more proactively with our student populations, and so that it's maybe not as circuitous. Now, that being said, I will ask Dana-Farber, incredibly respected organization, the Jimmy Fund, as well known of a nonprofit brand, out there. I'm curious, when you think about that period, Troy, what some of your favorite memories are, whether it was impact stories or just stellar events that you got to be a part of. I mean, what were some of the highlights?
Yeah, good question, Brett. I mean, my brother had been treated there, and so I felt a sort of really personal debt of gratitude to Dana-Farber for everything they did for my family and for him, and so that was it was a very personal thing to be there and to do the work we did, and then to be part of a machine that was being built, a really aspirational. I mean, we were raising $30 million a year, and then we were launching $1 billion campaign, first hospital in New England to do that. I mean, it was kind of once in a lifetime sort of opportunity, and I've had a few of those in my career that have just been really unique and special. So really no one specific thing, but more of just being part of something so big and that had so much impact, and that was really personal to me.
Love it. And Debbie, as you think about the path into philanthropy, but then ultimately pivoting to higher education, am I correct in that Colby was your primary higher education sort of starting point?
Yeah, I was a gift officer at Bates before I went to Joslin Diabetes Center. But yeah, the longest tenure in the management role was at Colby. And it was hard to leave academic medicine. So, you know, like Troy, I was in Boston. I was working for some of the Harvard teaching hospitals. Enormously powerful mission. And while Dana-Farber was certainly at the pinnacle of what we all aspired to, being a part of that kind of groundbreaking research and clinical care really made a tremendous impact on me. So it was really hard to leave academic medicine, but I did, and I loved my time at Colby. The change to UNH was a really personal one, and that was about public higher education. So I am a product of public higher education, having gone to the University of Maine. I really believe in public higher education, and what I saw at Colby and now have experienced with a child in college is how incredibly expensive an education like Colby or some of the other private schools is. And it's a wonderful education, but there are many families that that's out of reach for. And to be able to work at a place like UNH, where we make an excellent education affordable and accessible, is just incredibly rewarding. And I feel like, you know, much of who I am today is because I was able to go to the University of Maine. My parents didn't have a lot of money. I received aid. And it's really important for me to be able to continue that legacy and to be able to open it and have a role in opening it to other students and families.
I love that. And we're going to come back to what you're working on, what you're excited about, really the growth story that has been UNH in the context of public higher education for sure. Troy, I want to ask, our paths first crossed, I think, as you were wrapping up at what was then the Harvard School of Public Health, right before you went to the Development Guild. And you did have the opportunity, I believe, to be a part of a pretty transformational naming experience, which not a lot of folks, get the opportunity to be a part of. So I'd love your perspective on that. But then also just a window into your world at the Development Guild, which is a pretty unique model and a neat way to kind of get exposure to a variety of organizations, and then ultimately what led you to UNH.
Sure. So at Harvard School of Public Health, Brent, you're right. When we met there, we were launching the public phase of that campaign, and I think we were one of the earliest schools at Harvard to launch. And so our goal that we were given was not quite as ambitious as what we had hoped the university would allow us to have. So we were confident in it, but we thought, gosh, what's going to happen if we hit goal early? You know, what will that do to our momentum? And then, of course, when Gerald Chan's gift came forward, that blew the goal out of the water. And first school at Harvard to be named after a benefactor, and that was just an incredible moment to be a part of that. You know, the graduates of the School of Public Health are make some of the most impact, I think, in the world of all the graduates of all the schools of Harvard, and being a part of that mission was incredible. Also being there while that was named, and then also helping to secure some really special funding for metabolomics, which was where an area that I worked in there as well. That was just a great experience. But when you've exceeded your campaign goals so early in the campaign, and there's not really an opportunity to raise the goal, it does sort of prevent that momentum from being able to continue. So I think several of us at that time had transitioned on from HSPH, and I went on to Development Guild. I had actually hired Development Guild to help me build out the team at the School of Public Health, and it was a natural transition to go over and work with Bill and Susie Weber, with Victoria Jones, who I worked with there. So many great colleagues, worked with a lot of different organizations over those years, large and small, all sorts of different flavors. Worked in, both on the campaign planning side, from feasibility studies all the way up through launches of campaign reorgs, did in-house counsel, but also worked on the search side as well, which was kind of the unique model of Development Guild in having both verticals that they worked through. But Debbie Dutton, obviously, she knew the folks at Development Guild, and Debbie's name would always come up whenever we were doing a search. They'd be like, do you think Debbie Dutton could be a good candidate for this search? And everyone was like, well, Debbie's really happy at UNH, and she's doing such a great job. So I would always hear Debbie's name. She was like this legend. And Debbie's and my path had crossed years earlier when she was at Colby. as well. And so at any rate, I bought a house up in Durham, not because it was Durham, but just because it was a beautiful place on just the right spot of land, exactly where we wanted to be. And I remember reaching out to Debbie and saying, "Hey, I think I live down the street from your office." And she was like, "You're going to commute to Boston?" And I said, "Well, yeah, like, isn't it like an hour and a half?" And she was like, "Well, yeah, if you hit it right, like if you leave at 4 a.m." So I quickly learned that she was right. And that was a bear of a commute. It was a long, like, could be 2.5 hours each way on the wrong days. I remember calling Debbie eventually and saying, "You were so right. Oh my gosh, this is really a quality of life thing, and it just so happened that Debbie had an opportunity that had opened up right around that time. And so we started talking about what that could look like. And then I joined Debbie's team. That's about 5 years ago next month. And it's been wonderful. It's been a great time to come on board into a public university. I had only consulted in public higher ed. I hadn't worked in public higher ed before. And Debbie's story, which she just told you, why she's here, was really inspiring to me, and to want to come on board. I'd had some nephews who had come to UNH, played football, had a great experience here. And so I had a lot of respect for the institution. But seeing what Debbie had done in at that time, I think it had been about 5 years, Debbie, that you had been here, and how she had really transformed the advancement shop and all the great work that they were doing, coming off of a very successful campaign, really attracted me to it. And I saw it much as a similar opportunity to where I was earlier at Dana-Farber, really coming into a place that was just getting liftoff, and being able to be a part of that has been extraordinary.
Well, I have heard of the tried and true major gift tactic of, "Hey, I'm going to be in Durham. Would you have an opportunity to get together?" I've never heard the, "Hey, I bought a house in Durham," as a way of getting a job. That was thinly veiled, but well done. I almost bought it for a minute there. Debbie, how about you?
I'm just grateful every day that whatever it was, Brent, thinly veiled, open assault, whatever. I am grateful every day that I have Troy on my team.
I love that. Troy, can I ask, as it relates to the Chan gift, you touched on it for a minute, and for our listeners who aren't familiar, it was a $350 million gift. And Harvard loves naming buildings, but naming schools is a new thing. Without sharing anything you're not comfortable or shouldn't share, like how complicated was that aspect of a gift? I mean, sort of oftentimes think about the pricing strategy of gifts, if you will, and what are the levers of value that matter to a donor, and the negotiation associated with it. So again, without getting into the specifics, just how big of a deal was that in that case?
Yeah, I mean, I think no one really saw it coming. I think, the School of Public Health is one of the less wealthy schools of Harvard, of course. And I remember our dean, Julia Frank, used to say, this is probably one of the only parts of Harvard where your net worth decreases upon graduation. And, you're going to go out in the field and go save the world, but you're not going to make a lot of money doing it. So, it was hard. Fundraising at School of Public Health was hard, I think Gerald was inspired by a gift that we brought forward from a family. It turned out to be it was about a $25 million gift to create the Center for Metabolomics. And at the time, I think that would have been the largest gift in the history of the School of Public Health. And as we were getting ready to announce that gift and really celebrate it, that's, I think, when Gerald came forward to announce his, and then in terms of working through the mechanics of it, I think the university was so thrilled that the School of Public Health, of all places, would be the first to be able to be named with a gift like this. It touched off, as I'm sure you know, a whole series of gifts that then occurred at that level or higher that were able to lead to other naming opportunities that were transformational. But for Gerald, if you know Gerald, he's probably one of the most humble, brilliant people you'd meet. And he was such a well-known university citizen. I think, the university felt really comfortable with his philanthropy because he was so well-known, and it was so integrated into the life of the university, into so many different parts of the university. And so we really didn't have any hurdles there. And I think also the impact that particular gift was going to have at that school. In virtually all of it went to financial aid, and that was just really a special thing for him personally, I think. But then, of course, for us at the school, yeah.
Well said. Let's talk about UNH for a minute. And I think what stood out to me when we reconnected about a year ago, Troy, was just I think the word growth is just how I would summarize the conversation, where you really had a focus on growing the team, on growing revenue, on growing donors, on growing your talent pipeline, on growing your donor pipeline. And it seemed like it was really rooted in analysis and even some consulting work that was really focused on just the business of UNH. How do we drive revenue efficiently? But in a way that seems somewhat rare at a time when public higher education has increasingly struggled, frankly, for funding or has had to deal with budget cutbacks and so forth. And so I'm just curious, like maybe Debbie helping paint the picture of the opportunity that you walked into and sort of the context for the potential for growth and what the dynamic was with the board, with leadership, to really take a swing in a way that I feel like very few public higher education institutions have been able to as it relates to professionalizing advancement.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I feel really lucky that I worked with Mark Huddleston. So Mark Huddleston was the president when I was recruited to join, and things were not going well. And he was really candid about that. In fact, he handed me a survey and said, if you're going to take this job, you need to know what you're getting into. And the survey was a satisfaction survey, and it was very clearly a dissatisfaction survey.
And this was staff or alumni, or who?
It was advancement staff. It was advancement staff, right? So Mark had the vision that in order for us to really build and grow, we had to combine 3 previously separate units at UNH. So not unusual. Alumni was separate from development at that time, and so was the communications and marketing team. He brought them all together under advancement so that he could invest in a leader and he could invest in staff and resources. And he did that. And I was the beneficiary, really, of his vision and being able to partner with him to grow the team. And, when I joined the previous 5 or 6 years, the average they raised was about 14 million in cash. They didn't really do pledges. And so, as everyone said to me, this is a great opportunity. And I know many people who've gone to UNH. I've been around New England. I've always seen UNH, and people love UNH, but it just never seemed to raise money and to be that shop where they could really have that sustained effort. They had certainly some generous donors and some great success, but it was never a sustained growth. And I was always surprised by that. So I jumped at the opportunity to work there. I knew what the love of the alumni community was for its alma mater and the public in general around UNH who love UNH. So it really was a great president who empowered us, who gave us resources. We hired a lot of people. We embarked on training. We implemented, which I'm really grateful for, incentive pay. And that had been something I'd always wanted to do, but had never really gotten the green light. So that really changed the culture. When I arrived, gift officers really didn't have much in a portfolio. It was very constricted. They had unrealistic visit goals with a very small portfolio. So no one was really doing visits. And when they were, it was quite measured and contained. And there was no incentive or goals around philanthropy or fundraising. So we totally changed all that. We started incentivizing people just to get out the door and meet their visit goals. And lo and behold, that first year where there was an incentive to do it, they all met their visit goals. And then we started really building the philanthropic piece. And how do we motivate people to achieve challenging but realistic goals? And so, we did all those things. We moved from about 12 to 14 million a year to high 30s a year. And then Troy came. And with Troy, we really, again, took another leap, right? So there was a whole new level of professionalism. Troy is an amazing blend of a data-driven financial person who is also extremely articulate. And he can write and he can communicate. And those two skills together are really rare. And Troy has them. And with that ability to both manage the data, be very data-driven, very, very focused, and also be able to inspire and motivate and write compelling case statements, it really took us and has taken us to the next level. So this year we will raise more than we've ever raised in UNH's history. So 75 million, maybe more, Troy, right? 75 million is just where we are now.
I mean, we got 16 days to go. Anything's possible, right?
But it's been, to go in a decade from 12 to 14 million a year in cash to now be at 75 million. It's a great story. Troy and I will both tell you that we should have been at 75 million years ago. and we're glad we got there now, but we really see the opportunity at UNH as significantly more. And that's what makes it fun every day.
Debbie, let me just ask you,
Yeah.
I feel like there's still this debate or skepticism or outright opposition to incentive compensation in this sector,
absolutely.
Which I find completely ridiculous, because
Agreed.
we love incentivizing football coaches or strength coaches or basketball coaches or presidents for that matter, but it's taboo as it relates to advancement. And there are leaders that are pushing in that regard. Rod Grabowski, somebody who we've recently connected with at University of Buffalo. He's done some great writing and thinking on it. The folks at, there are more and more case studies, but it still feels crazy to me that it's not just
Agreed.
Status quo. But I'm sure that you encountered some of that resistance. I'd love to just know, as you think about some of those early, because you're dealing with, it sounds like, some real culture issues, some just standards of work that you were trying to turn around. And compensation is a factor. We know it's not the only factor by a long shot in building a great organization. But what were some of the examples in either data or even anecdotes from your people when you were able to sort of introduce that? What was the, one, how much opposition did you face, if any? And two, when did you start to feel, hey, this really can be an important lever to driving growth in philanthropy?
Yeah, well, I've always believed in it, because I guess I've been far more practical when I think about what I've done. So I was a gift officer, right? I'm not asking people to do anything that I hadn't done for years. I was a gift officer. That's where I spent the bulk of my time, was out doing donor visits. And I saw what motivated me, right? And I was motivated by wanting to be one of the most successful gift officers that was meeting goals and exceeding expectations. And I really didn't get any opposition from the gift officers. I think it was twofold, Brent. It was incentivizing them to be focused, right? Because we know there's a million things that come across our plates as gift officers, and we need them to be focused on who are they going to visit, why are they visiting them, what's the plan, and then how are they moving them towards a gift. And if you're incentivizing really key things to get that in place, it's really not rocket science. I mean, again, Troy has done an amazing job in taking us to the next level, but it's pretty common sense focused. It's how do you focus it? How do you use the data to drive it there? And so it really was my philosophy that we are in sales. And that is, to your point, kind of a dirty word, but we do sales. And the for-profit sales world has had incentives forever, right? And there's so much data and great literature that shows that when you're incentivizing people to achieve, they achieve, right? So why wouldn't we want to take those best practices that have been studied, tried, true, developed in the for-profit sector and bring them, to us? And so, one of the reasons why Troy and I click so well is we both really embrace that philosophy. And I would say the training that Troy embarked on, first it was Plus Delta, and now we have a trainer who came from Plus Delta, but is really our partner. That's what it's all about. It's all about those key steps that get us towards the close. And that's exactly what salespeople do.
No, I think that's well said. And look, we, even as we think about our own goal setting at EverTrue, everybody tends to focus on what people would call the lagging indicators, right? The 75 million, right? That's the lagging indicator. Or in our case, it could be customers or revenue or retention and so forth. But behind every one of those lagging indicators are a bunch of leading indicators, right? How do you get to 75 million from 14? It's about how many relationships were built. And how do you build a relationship? You have meetings. And how do you get meetings? You ask for meetings, you reach out to people, you call, you email, you LinkedIn, you do all of these things. And so I am sure if we were to break it down and say, how did you really go from 14 to 75 million? You know, some of it could be staff and growth in headcount, but it absolutely has to be, there are leading indicators that were moved. And it sounds like some of the incentives that you created were not focused on 75 million, but rather focused on, let's get the conversations that lead to relationships that lead to revenue. And I'm sure if we went back and looked at the data, we would start to see those leading indicators in a way that starts to predict the revenue growth that you've experienced.
Absolutely. You know, visits drive, right? Visits drive revenue. When you're not doing visits and you're not connecting in a personal way with people, thank God for Zoom now, right? But
thank God for Zoom.
Thank God for Zoom. But you know, those personal connections drive revenue. You cannot get to the place with a donor where they feel passionate and connected and willing to go where they need to go, where you want them to go, without a personal relationship. And you can't do that by mail or phone. Zoom gets us closer, but you know, people have to get out of the office. And as we know, there's so many things that keep you in the office if you're not really focused. But you know, to your point, it's somewhat blocking and tackling, right? So before Troy came, we set up some processes just to make sure that those leading indicators were happening, right? And we looked at visits, we looked at proposals. How many proposals did they need to submit? What was the visit goal? What was the revenue goal? So we had all those things lined up. Troy's really taken it to the next level, but it really is blocking and tackling. If you want to get to that end result, you have to put those steps in place to get you there.
So Troy, I first have to ask you, as a former almost priest, when we say things like, thank God for Zoom, how do you feel? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thank God for everything.
All right. So would you be willing to share your perspective on some of those leading indicators and behaviors that you've seen continue to accelerate? And maybe we start with the bottom of the pyramid and work our way up, because what I think is really unique about this story is, at least my understanding is, it's not just one of, we went out and found a handful of really big gifts and juiced our top line number, but the health of the base of the pyramid is much stronger than it's been. And I think that's why I feel like the UNH story is so rare, but one that needs to be told, because I think, frankly, a lot of your peers have basically given up on donor count at this point. And you've been able to prove that there is an opportunity to have a healthier organization across the pyramid.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, when I arrived, Debbie and the team had built a solid base of annual fund. And now over the past 5 years, we've been able to continue to expand that on the staffing side, which of course has led to growth on the donor side. So I think as of today, we have more donors this year than we did last year. Less of them are alums than we'd like them to be. I mean, we're aiming to get back up to 10% alumni participation by the time our campaign goes public. And that's at a time, as you know, when everyone else is sort of accepting the fact that, you know, participation rates are going back down. We don't accept the fact that that has to be the case. We think that we should challenge ourselves to find ways to better engage our alums and all of our constituencies to keep that base growing. I mean, last year we had over 20,000 donors. This year, like I said, we'll have more than that. Our giving days that we call our 603 challenge this year had over 12,000 donors in 5 days who gave, and those are real numbers. 12,000 who contributed $3 million in not counting any funny money or anything, pledges or anything like that. That's all cash in for UNH. So I think we've realized that we have to keep that base growing. Because even if only 1% of them ever kind of go up to the major gift end of the pyramid, we want that 1% to be as large as possible. So we have invested both at the transformational level of giving, really doubling down on 8-figure and aspirationally 9-figure gifts, and made that conversation more formal and more regular. But that translates all the way down through from principal to major, down to annual giving. And I think that it's critical that there be attention paid to all of those levels equally.
Tell me about your strategies on the top end of the pyramid. And I know this is one of those sectors where there aren't too many industries where I could give your institution $10, $10,000, $10 million, or $1 billion. Like there just aren't a lot of verticals where, when you compare it to sales, Debbie, not very many sales teams have a menu of offerings that range from one figure to nine figures, let's say. But philanthropy does. And one of the areas that fascinates me is just, how do you even frame, when you're dealing with an ultra high net worth individual, ballpark? Should I be talking 5 million or 50 million? How do you even start to pressure test to know? And I know sometimes it's, let's be really specific and let's make a clear ask. And we've done the research. We know the means are there. But you, I'm sure, have had situations where you thought somebody could do more and they've done less, and you thought somebody could do less and they've done more. And so how do you kind of walk that line? Or do you have any stories that come to mind relating to that?
Yeah. And, that's one of the basic skills I think I learned early on. I probably learned it when I was a gift officer at Children's Hospital. I was afraid to ask the question, if I were to prepare a proposal for you, what range should I be thinking about? What range are you thinking about? I was afraid to ask that. And what would happen is I would have a high net worth individual. I would spend months chasing down information and developing things. And I would hand them a proposal and they'd say, oh, I intended to give $5,000. Right? I mean, what a waste of time. Oh, wonderful that they gave $5,000, but to spend months, right, preparing and working with physicians and researchers, right? Ask the question, what are you thinking about, right? And that gives you a sense. And so I will say, by asking that question, and it's one of the principal things that we've trained on with our partner, we're business people. We shouldn't apologize for asking for philanthropy. It's what we do. We should never say that we're with the alumni relations team and we're coming to visit. We are talking about an investment in philanthropy. And it's a great thing to talk about, right? So the more business-like we are, and the more that we put those parameters around our conversations, the more that we're maximizing our gift officer's time. So when we have those conversations and someone indicates that they want to do, well, I'm thinking between $500,000 and $1 million. Great. I'm thinking between 25 and 50,000. Great. I'm going to scale my time. I'm going to make sure that I'm spending the months of work where the ROI is greater. And I'm still going to pay attention and, of course, want to partner with someone who wants to give us money, but I'm going to make sure that I'm not spending inordinate amounts of time for something that's not going to be as much of a payoff. And it sounds, I guess that's my sales bias coming in, but we are bottom line focused. It's what we do. And it's where we've had to be. And I really think you can do what I just said and still embrace the mission of a nonprofit and know that you're helping make the nonprofit better and you're helping someone engage in something that's meaningful.
That's so good. Can I ask how often the response would be, I'm not sure, or I don't know. What would you recommend? Okay.
Not very often. Mostly people have an idea. Now, I will say, if someone says to me 100,000 to 250, when I come back to them with a proposal, it's starting at 250 and it's going up from there, right? And it's this iterative process. Or sometimes that is a range and we say, great, that's wonderful. We really want to focus them on impact. And I think Josh Sims, our partner, has been really great in working with Troy and the team to really think about, before the number gets too embedded in the conversation, what do we want to achieve? Because that really should be the driver, right, of what you're going to give. And I think that's it's a skill and a nuance. And I will say, there've been conversations recently where we had hoped for a 7 or 8 figure gift and it was a 6-figure gift. And you need to, of course, be grateful and continue along those conversations. But that's power, right? Knowledge is power. And when you know where someone's thinking, you can really be more effective as your role.
Troy, any experiences? And I also love, we learn from our mistakes too. Any circumstances where you've anchored way too high or way too low that you either recall or willing to share or, have learned from?
Yeah, sure. And Brett, I also just want to share that, on that front end or at the top end of the pyramid, one thing for me that's been a game changer has been the fact that both Debbie as president of the foundation and President Dean as president of the university have deliberately set aside time to focus on that particular topic with us in development. That it's not something that Debbie or Jim do as an add-on. It's something that they see as really integral to their role. And so when we meet on a regular basis to talk about the top of the pyramid, and we talk through strategy and tactics, and then have a president who's willing to do upwards of 100 visits plus a year, and the work that Debbie's doing there, that's not to be taken for granted. A lot of places just wouldn't have that type of engagement with the leadership of their foundation, their university. So just wanted to call that out as I think also a real game changer for us. But to your point about aiming too high or too low, the gift I had mentioned earlier that we ended up doing at Harvard School of Public Health, I think is a good example. We were aiming for 50 million. We thought a 50 million endowment would be really great to have for this center, and the donors came back and said, well, why would I give you 50 million of an endowment? I could invest the money better than you could. I'd rather promise 25 million in current use pledged over time. And we were able to pivot. And while the number didn't have as much pizzazz on the surface, underneath it accomplished the same amount of work. So I think being able to be nimble and pivot to where the donor needs to be and where they want to be. And I think in our case at UNH, many of the folks who are at a point now where they're starting to make really substantial investments, philanthropic investments in the university, they weren't there 5 years ago or 10 years ago in the campaign. And I hear from a lot of folks on the foundation board and others who we engage in conversation about philanthropy that they're really inspired by so many new names and new folks who are like, who are all of these people who are making really major gifts to the university? They're all the folks who in the last campaign, were really at the annual level. So
let's circle back then to being nimble, pivoting, and thank God for Zoom. While you have a concentrated alumni population in the Northeast, I know there are over 1,000 UNH alumni in San Francisco, LA, Seattle, places that are not particularly accessible that are now one Zoom link away with HD cameras. And you've got a president who has leaned in and committed to being a real fundraising partner. Tell me about the intersection of engaging people virtually, of being able to bring in the president or the athletic director or other kind of campus celebrities into a more intimate yet highly efficient Zoom environment relative to the pre-pandemic. Can we get on the president's schedule to go visit so-and-so in New York on this day? I mean, just what is it like as we now in mid 2022 have settled into this new hybrid reality?
Debbie, you want me to start off on that? And I can,
you bet.
Just to say, Brent, that I think that the when the pandemic started, we really dug into just wellness checks. Not really calling for any other reason, just to make sure people were okay. And as I go back and look at our, we're up to about, pretty close to 4,000 visits a year now as a team, including those that we do virtually. And as I go back and look at, the content of some of the visits from the past couple of years, and I still see that language in there, wellness check. I think it's just changed the nature of the relationship between a gift officer and a donor or prospective donor. That, the team that we've built and our ethos and culture is that we really care about you. And it's not just about your gift. When it's time, we'll get there. But it's about you and your relationship to the university in your life. So we've used Zoom to be able to establish rapport and trust, and then we travel, for deeper, more meaningful conversations about a particular gift or to make a solicitation. So Debbie and I think have tried to reinforce that as our sort of our model moving forward, is that early discovery and qualification conversations should really be happening in a virtual space like this, and then as we get deeper into a relationship, it sort of justifies the investment of travel, and as a result, we've seen our visits go from a couple thousand a year up to now, like I said, 4,000 a year, which I think really sets us up then for more results down the line. So.
What about donor behavior? And maybe this would even be in the last couple of months where there was a period in the pandemic when there was just no other option. We now have an option. And I'm curious, do you have donors who are like, look, you don't need to come see me. Like, I'm good. I want to support you. Don't waste your time and resources coming out here. As donors have gotten way more comfortable managing their business, their personal finances with all of their advisors, supporters, lawyers, agents, you name it, remotely. Do you feel like that is spilling over into philanthropy, or is it different?
Yeah, so I'll jump in, and Troy, you fill in the details. I would say absolutely, right? So we would get that anyway. We would get don't come all the way to California to see me, and then your only option was to try to catch him on phone, and maybe the connection wasn't good. And now we can Zoom with people. And when there was that hesitancy, like I'm not sure I want to meet a stranger from UNH in my home or out to dinner, now that barrier of sort of the awkwardness or the concern about just meeting with someone you've never met before, we can Zoom. And so that's really why, Troy talks about the power of going from, I think, 12 or 1,300 visits a year to 4,000, because it's just such a comfortable medium for people, and it opens up so much more, and we can do those discovery visits. And frankly, it's a great way to have balance for gift officers, right? So to Troy's message, we want people to have balance when they come work at UNH. We can't pay the top dollar. We know they can commute into Boston and make a heck of a lot more money than we can pay them. But we want to offer quality of life. And Zoom, I believe, is giving gift officers much more quality of life. You don't have to jump on a plane every time you want to connect with someone. You can use this medium. And it also saves the institutions money. So I think it's a win-win. And I give huge kudos to Troy and his team for really embracing the technology and thinking about how to use it effectively.
I was catching up with Megan Morey from Williams College, and she was saying also just the sheer environmental cost as well, as more institutions are having serious dialogue around just sustainability, right? I mean, think about the carbon footprint of this experience relative to, can I come see you in San Francisco? So there's not, I guess, what are the negatives though? I think we're all kind of on the forward facing, this is the future side of things, but are there drawbacks at this point? Or do you just feel like this is one of those kind of step function changes where, we didn't have email, then we had it, right? We didn't have high-speed internet, then we had it. We didn't have Zoom, and now we have it. Or I guess in this case, it existed, but it just wasn't adopted, right? You didn't have planned giving prospects who would say, yeah, sure, I'll jump on a Zoom. Now you do. We're not ever going to go back. But I do think there's a bit of a tension in the sector right now of, finally, I can get back to my 100 visits a year. I can get out there. I love traveling. I miss the hotels. I love going to New York a couple times a year. That's not for everybody, but there are some people
you're right,
who really get energized by that. Do we need to go back there?
Well, I would think, Troy. I think so. From two sides. So one is the side of the donor or the prospective donor. I think Debbie and I often hear alums will say, UNH is my happy place. When I come back to campus, or when you come visit with me in person, it's like you're bringing really, really good stuff my way. And so I've heard that over and over from our team and all over the country when they travel. It's like they're bringing UNH out there. So it creates a much more, just a deeper experience. I think of Zoom as more of the transactional types of conversations, a quick hop, but they're not the deeper, more meaningful conversations that are going to really move the relationship. So we've tried, I think, kind of keeping that in that direction. The other thing for us, we're UNH. We don't have an abundance of resources. So, we don't travel, first class. We're you're getting the cheap seats and you're staying in the inexpensive hotels. It's not a really luxury type of experience to be a gift officer out on the road. And right now, travel is a nightmare.
Totally.
Right. So who wants to travel?
Totally.
So I have found that, with our team now, when they travel, it is kind of a sacrifice for them to have to do it. Our group in development, we're a hybrid, group where the majority of our work is done remotely. We can come to campus. We have wonderful facilities on campus that we can use to be here, but we're working from wherever we are in the world. And to have to then, go through all the rigmarole of travel is really stressful and not as productive. I will say that as our alumni relations team gets back up to speed with its events that are back out on the road in development, we've really tried to partner with them and leverage those events for gift officers to be able to tag along, to bring folks to those events and then have visits, but also with Debbie and President Dean as well when they're at those events, and we can then reach out to folks that we want them to have some time with in person. I mean, that's so much more meaningful, I think, than a Zoom could ever be.
Well said. When you don't have a lot of donors and dollars, you don't need as much stewardship, and success creates new challenges and opportunities. And as you think about really whether it's your 603 day, the broad-based growth, what we preach at EverTrue is that whether it's digital interaction or a first donation, that is a signal of engagement that ideally leads to rapid qualification, which leads to rapid assignment, which leads to rapid stewardship and follow-up, and that we can really shorten the cycle by elevating that sort of intersection of stewardship and discovery. But that's a lot of names to work through. I know you've been data-driven in your approach, Troy, but just how do you think about building a stewardship apparatus or the mid-level apparatus that can now really make sense of those 20,000 donors in a maybe more personalized way than you would have in the past?
And I think, when we were able to bring on EverTrue last year and offer that as a really powerful tool for our gift officers to have in their tool chest, we have a small but mighty research team that does a fantastic job, but there's not many of them. And so our gift officers, can leverage a tool like EverTrue to have that real-time intel about who's coming in to the pipeline. I think about a third of all the donors who made a gift during our giving day, during our 603 challenge, about a third of those 12,000 were first-time donors. And so who are they? Where are they coming from? And what's their story? And so having a tool like EverTrue to be able to really dig into that and make sense of it and prioritize outreach has been a game changer for us. And I think it will continue to throughout the campaign. But that's where I see that being really valuable.
Well, I think it's really all of those 20,000 people, or the third of them that are new donors. They all have a Debbie story or a Troy story, like what inspired them to give. They very easily could have gotten the appeal and said, you know what, nope. But they said yes, even if in a small capacity, because they believe in public higher education. Is it because their lives were changed? Is it because their family has been positively impacted? And it's just, I do feel like we're on the cusp of really being able to get at way more of those stories. And part of it is by going from 1,000 to 4,000 visits. But then how do we go from 4,000 to 40,000 more personalized experiences, even if it's not a visit per se? And it's kind of that, it used to be very binary. You were either in a portfolio and somebody was coming to visit you, or you were in like the call center pool. And it was like very much either or. And I think we have this opportunity, and obviously we're trying to weave in thank you in more creative ways to just get that personal story, which could be literally a one-on-one from a student that's a beneficiary to a donor, or it could be more generic, you help students like me, but just having that kind of sliding scale of personalization is something that we're going to continue to push really, really hard on, and just appreciate the partnership and your willingness to innovate. And Troy, we've had the opportunity to connect over the year. Debbie, I love meeting you, and it's exactly why we started the podcast, because just hearing your perspective on creative incentives and compensation and fundraising is sales. And we have other guests who will say it's absolutely not sales. And it's just great to hear those various viewpoints as we all kind of work in pursuit of the greater good. Now, I know, according to Troy's LinkedIn, that you are hiring, but this is usually when I say, are you hiring? And if folks who are listening want that quality of life, who believe in public higher education, who like what they've heard today, what is the best way for them to get in touch?
Hey, I would say, Brent, reach out to me directly. I've had so many informational conversations with folks, and over the past few years, I mean, this past year, Debbie and I have hired about 15 gift officers onto our team, and we're going to continue to build out with the resources that the university is giving us. But I think we really do have a special group of folks that we've assembled here, a great culture. And as Debbie said, we might not be able to afford to pay the top dollar, but we do try to really ensure the best possible quality of life and the most meaningful experience for the work. So I'd say reach out to me. We always seem to have some positions open and going, and Debbie and I are always having proactive conversations with candidates, because you never know what the landscape will look like down the road. So.
Yeah. Alternatively, you could just buy a house in Durham and then reach out. That would be another strategy. Okay. Last question, then we'll wrap. Troy, what was your favorite stop on the RV experience with your aunt?
Oh, favorite stop. So the first one that came to mind when you just asked that question was Hershey Park. Hershey. I don't know. That just popped into my head when you just asked that question, but
why not?
I don't know. That was a really.
That's good. That's all I wanted. I've gotten that question a lot lately. I rarely get to ask it. So thank you. And Debbie, last question. What is the number one hike in New England that we should do that we probably haven't?
Oh, geez. Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think Mount Monadnock is one of the best. Probably many people have done it, but it is one of my favorite hikes. It's a great workout if you take the right route, and it's an amazing view from the top.
Love it. Great points to end on. Thank you both for your time. Keep up the amazing work. Keep focused on growth, and thank you for sharing your stories. With that, I'm going to wrap today's episode. Brent coming in live with Troy Finn and Debbie Dutton from the University of New Hampshire. Thanks and take care.